thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here and talking about this topic. I love talking to, I like to call them emerging filmmakers and really anyone who's emerging in their career. And so I feel like if I talk about how I experience things throughout my career, I can hopefully, teach other people, or other people can learn from that, how I got to where I got. And so hopefully they can do the same. Wow, I haven't heard no one's referenced Hallmark in quite some time. So that's going way back. But I'm glad that you did, actually, because I did work for Hallmark Cards, and I worked for the corporation. I actually worked for a family-owned business at Hallmark, and then transitioned to corporate after that. But working for corporate, I loved Hallmark. It was a great company. It kind of shows you, though, that that was over 25 years ago. So that was a long time ago. So anyone who's looking to kind of create a career overnight, doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're a Bitcoin millionaire, then you can wake up the next morning and all of a sudden have millions of dollars of Bitcoin, and then you got to sell it, and then you got to remember your password and all that fun stuff. But traditionally, most people don't, one day they're nothing, they're straight out of university, and the next day they're an executive. It doesn't work that way. It's years and years of hard work. I found, although earlier in my career, I didn't embrace this as much as I do now, I learned something from everyone. You learn something from everyone you come in contact with, whether they're a subordinate or whether you report to them. You can learn something from everyone. And so to answer your question, Hallmark was a very long time ago. I loved working for that company, but it wasn't what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to be in the movie business, and I wanted to ultimately make movies. But I took a 25-year kind of detour getting to become a producer. And everything I learned along the way, I incorporate into my daily life. So I learned a lot about marketing at Hallmark. When I worked at Hallmark, they were kind of, bar none, the best at television commercials, and everyone sort of universally recognized it. In fact, I would even say that the current Google spots that are running on TV that show sort of this family unit, or this, there's all these different ones. They have a whole bunch of them. Those all rooted in, when you care enough to send the very best, which was Hallmark's slogan when I was working there. And they, back then TV spots didn't do that. TV spots didn't tell stories like that. And Hallmark was the first one to do it. And now all most storytelling television spots kind of model that Hallmark model. And so it's really great to see, I was watching the Google television commercials the other day, started tearing up, and I was like, why is this getting me so much? And I'm like, oh, they're pulling on my emotional heartstrings on purpose. But now I'm remembering their product, and it's really good storytelling. And I was like, this started with Hallmark, a long time ago. So I didn't, Hallmark ultimately wasn't fulfilling for me personally, even though it was a great company to work for. And so I transitioned from Hallmark to AMC. And I worked at AMC, which was, kind of the peripheral on the entertainment industry, working in motion picture exhibition. I started off in operations, and was lucky enough to ultimately get into some marketing at AMC. Won a couple of awards working on some movies at Disney and Warner Brothers and Paramount. And so started to get noticed by some of the studios by doing these marketing programs. Yeah. And then ultimately I got put at a theater which was sort of the first megaplex, the first multi-screen complex that had, it was the first one to have 24 screens. And you don't see those big theaters anymore, but at the time it was in vogue, and it was the thing to do. Now sort of the neighborhood theaters are back, the 6 to 8 to 12 screen complexes. But at the time, 24 screens was a big deal. And so all of the studios came to tour this complex. And I took all the studios on tour, because I was the marketing manager. except for Universal. Universal Pictures came by on my day off, so I didn't actually get to take the Universal executives on tour. And it was ironic because like a month later, someone from Universal reached out to me and said, "Hey, you'd be really good for this job we have. It's entry level. You should apply for it because you have an exhibition background, you have a marketing background. You should do it." So I did. And then when I ultimately accepted the job and went in to tell my boss at AMC that I was quitting, he was like, "Oh, you got this job because you took everybody on a tour of our facilities. Like, that's like cheating." And I was like, I swear I didn't talk to the Universal people. They didn't come by. I was on my day off, and he actually checked the schedule. He's like, "You're right." He's like, "You know what?" He's like, "I actually think I took the Universal people on the tour." So it was kind of this funny thing that I sort of lucked into this position at Universal. Had some experience, but that launched the next 20 years of my career. And at Universal, I kind of found my way. I think I found a way to kind of leverage my love of movies and my desire to market, and put those together and started off in theater marketing and sort of rose through the ranks of that department, and ultimately to like second in charge of that division, and liaisoned a lot with the creative side of marketing, actually getting involved in the campaigns for movies with a lot of other department heads and division heads, and kind of help them put together strategies for big $100, $200, $300 million movies that ultimately went on to do a lot of business at the box office. To date, I've worked on, not all at Universal, some of them were focus titles I got involved in, or some of them were non-Universal titles that I got involved in, or I even count my shorts as one of the movies that I've worked on. I've worked on over 375 movies throughout my 30-year career, in different respects. More than 100 of those as a senior executive. So my stamp is kind of on some of the more recent movies that I worked on. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, absolutely. It answers the question. Now, talking about the movies, because you have mentioned it, I think everybody wants to know, because it's a question. I think many students in the university, they ask that question, like, what is the most important skill when you want to produce, to produce in something like a film, a theater, television series, and also about the budget. How can you control the budget, or what is the first step to secure the financing of a film, and not to how we have this budget, but we can this is the budget and this is it. But how is it? How is the process of it?
Yeah, it's complex, to be honest. And I work with a lot of line producers right now at Cardinal Trio. I'm working on 3 to 4 movies, and then I do independent producing outside of Cardinal Trio, and I'm working on another 3 movies, possibly getting ready to sign one more. So that's like 6 to 8 movies that are on my slate, if you will. Although it's not a traditional slate from like one company, but from multiple companies. All of those kind of emerging from me working with the Cardinal Trio team. And so at Cardinal Trio, we have like 3 partners, and I'm definitely the marketing and distribution expert. We have a physical production expert, Nick Sherma, and we have a creative expert, Jason Parker. Now, budgeting comes under the physical production side of the business. And so I'm definitely involved in the budgeting process. I definitely, go through film budgets line item by line item. Sometimes it takes hours to do that. And you have to make sure everything that you're going to need for the shoot is accounted for. And that includes stuff like, people forget about stuff like PR, public relations or publicity. People forget to include in their budgets any kind of money for distribution. Not that you'd have to self-distribute, so you wouldn't need, millions of dollars in your budget for distribution, but even having any amount of money for creating digital prints, DCPs, or setting aside money for screening the movie when you ultimately want to screen it Say you don't go the film festival route, say you're going to screen it for executives at different releasing entities or different studios. You have to have money for all of that. So you have to budget for all of that stuff. And it's hard it's an arduous process. You have to sit down, and there are programs. None are coming to mind right now, but like there are programs you can buy that are specific for, motion picture budgeting. And they'll kind of walk you through it. But ultimately most of the proof is in the pudding. So you have to put most of the money into the physical production of the movie. And talent takes up a big chunk of that. Obviously you have to have a good script, and you have to be prepared to pay the writer or pay for rewrites. You have to pay all of the above the line people. And then all the many people that work below the line. And I don't know, I don't know how educated some of your listeners are, but like the line producer is kind of the cutoff for that. And the line producer is usually the one who puts together the budget, with the above the line folks. So, like below the line, you have things on the budget for like, day rates for extras, like if you're going to have extras in your movie. Say you have 4 extras in your movie, you're going to need those extras for 4 days, and they get paid $100 a day. I'm just kind of generalizing, but this is something that's a very specific line item, and you have to account for, if it's a union shoot, you have to make sure that they get their breaks, and you have to make sure that they get food and water and stuff during the day. So like all of that has to be budgeted, and all of that has to be in the motion picture budget for the movie. And it's stuff that you have to go through, just line item by line item, and make sure that it's all accounted for.
Wow. So it's like a long process. And I mean, every single piece you have to put on the budget so you can make sure the budget is fulfilled and you don't surpass the budget for extra little bit of money.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of producers and even directors sometimes will be very budget conscious and make sure that you don't go over budget. And the best way to not go over budget is to sit down and spend hours and hours making sure that everything's in the budget. So like if you take the budget, say you're working for a production company and they want to know what the budget is, so often I've had people submit budgets and they're like, oh, well, my movie's $1 million, but I want Christian Bale or whatever. And it's like, do you know Christian Bale? No. Do you know what his day rate is? No. Have you made an offer to Christian Bale's agent? No. Okay, because like that's the kind of stuff that people don't necessarily know about. Is that unless and I'm not picking on Christian Bale because I actually love his work, but like unless he knows you or he knows this script is really good, chances are he's not going to do it for scale. And so you're going to have to find a way to attract at least one recognizable name to your project, to get interest in it, quite frankly, unless you're making like a super independent feature.
And for example, those people that are very beginners in making the movies, how is the pitching format so they can pitch to the executives and they go, yeah, this is my idea, this is my script. But what is the extra mile that they have to put in so they can finance the movie that they want to be financed?
Financing is a challenge, and it's something that I deal with on a daily basis. I'm working on 6-7 movies. I don't have full funding raised for a single one of those movies yet. There are tax incentives and or tax credits. And like I happen to know right now that the Canary Islands, which is Portuguese or Spanish?
I think
I can never remember. I know it's off the coast of both. So the Canary Islands are offering a very lucrative tax credit right now. So like they're trying to get people there. Never been, had friends go there and seen pictures, and it's a beautiful place, especially if you go, when it's in season, if you will. But like, I would love to shoot a movie there, and they have very good tax rebates there. So, and this is just generically explaining it so that everyone that's listening can understand. Like, if you have $1 million movie and you work it out with the Canary Islands film offices that you're going to shoot it there, and they're going to give you an incentive. And I'm just making up the incentive, but they have lucrative ones. Say it's 50%. You have $500,000 that you're instantly going to get back once you make this movie, once you spend that money there. Mm-hmm. And so that's really good when you're showing investors like, hey, I'm already going to get, 50% of my money back. And tax credits vary. In the United States, they're as low as 5-10% to as high as 35-40%. A 50% tax credit is really big. There's not a lot of places I've heard that offer those. But, right now in the United States, places like Georgia and Atlanta and other cities in Georgia are offering, 30 to 40% rebates. And that's really good. It's hard to ignore that. And if it creatively makes sense to shoot your movie in Georgia or the Canary Islands or anywhere else that's offering these great tax incentives, you can go back to your investors and you can say, you're automatically going to recoup 30, 40, 50% of your money. So that's a really strong
the reality
point
of the industry. And what is crowdfunding? Maybe many people have heard of it because I think it's another way to get money to finance your movie or
what
series.
Is it called? Sorry.
Crowdfunding?
Oh, yeah, crowdfunding. Yeah. I did crowdfunding on a movie that I already made. I didn't do it personally, but the project did. And I think we raised at least half of our budget from crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is tricky because if you're like a social influencer, you have a lot of people that follow you, it's easier than if you don't. And so otherwise you have to create a groundswell. And so creating a groundswell organically is kind of difficult, but always lead with video. Video is the best, right? People will watch videos, whether it's on TikTok or Instagram or, whatever it is. If you make a compelling short video, honestly, I would say 30 seconds, no longer than 2 minutes. Anyone whose video who runs more than 2 minutes, I don't care how good it is, you start to lose interest of the viewer. And especially if someone's looking to invest money or to just give you money through crowdfunding in hopes of getting a tchotchke or something in return, or a piece of the project like a movie poster or a Blu-ray or whatever, you have to give them a compelling reason. And so if you're making a documentary, let's pick on the Canary Islands again, about the Canary Islands, and you're getting this tax incentive and you go and you create this video and you're like, hey, everybody, I'm making this really compelling video about, or documentary about sharks that live off the Canary Islands or whatever, whatever your story is. If you have video and you test even if it's just 30 seconds to a minute worth of footage of what that movie is going to ultimately look like, then you should be able to, at least push the rock up the hill one roll towards getting that groundswell of people interested in giving you money for the project. I will say though, unless you have just hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, which is really hard because then you're talking about being a social influencer, it's hard to raise a lot of money on crowdfunding. It's a great tool to use for doing a short or even doing an ultra low budget feature, something that's $500,000 or less. Because it just at a certain point on crowdfunding, it doesn't matter how many people you reach, you just aren't going to be able to raise $20 million. It just isn't practical.
Wow.
Unless you're famous already, because I've heard of a lot of scenarios where people who have made movies before, or actors who have been in movies and want to become a filmmaker, they go to crowdfunding, but they also can push a button and reach all of their followers at once. And so you have kind of this captive audience who wants to see your stuff anyway. So of course they're going to donate money to see what you're going to make. There's other platforms. I work with the guys over at Slated. I don't know if you've heard of Slated, but Slated is a film finance and distribution platform. Okay. There's things like Stage 32 that are out there. There's a few of those types of sites where you can go and put your project up on their site and list it. And then if you go through certain criteria with them, your project in the script stage is open to all of their potential investors. And most of those kinds of sites deal with accredited investors, although Stage 32 is more like a social network. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of people out there that are in the business. And I've heard, dozens of stories where people use that platform to like make like a short movie or like a really, really super indie movie. And Slated, I've heard of tons of scenarios where people will make like, full length, feature length, independent movies that ultimately get distribution through a company that you've heard of. I call them reputable releasing entities.
Yes, I mentioned it because there's a series. I don't know if you have heard of it, The Chosen. It's a Christian series, and they are doing it by crowdfunding. And I've been searching for it as well, the crowdfunding, how it is, how you can work with it. It's not easy, but I think it's not also impossible. But I mean, it's really hard. It's a really hard journey, but I think it's not that impossible to begin generating the influencer, being like a community, and then you begin to grow the community, and then you can go and make the film. So yeah, I have seen.
Yeah, nothing. I should say, because sometimes I have a tendency, and my partners and friends will tell me this. I come across as maybe too practical, but I like to answer people's questions honestly and yes, let them know the challenges ahead. But you're absolutely right. Nothing is impossible, and crowdfunding is a good way to kind of get your foot in the door. Like if you can make a low budget movie through crowdfunding, and if you're super talented, I also like to say the marketplace will decide everything for you.
That's true.
It does. It just does. Like I was at a film festival last month, and I was talking about the marketplace, and at first I think people were like, "Oh, he sounds like a skipping CD." But the truth is the marketplace will tell you. Like if your first movie is really bad, the marketplace will tell you. Like they will tell you, like if you post it on Vimeo or whatever, and a bunch of people are like, "This sucks," like then they're telling you. Like it's not that they're misunderstanding your art; it's that your art isn't reaching the audience the way you intended it to. Exactly. So but nothing is impossible. So like crowdfunding is a great way to kick off your first project. And if you make a good project, then that's a great portfolio for you to get in the door in other places. So I nothing I say is meant to discourage. It's only meant to educate and influence.
Yeah. No, it's important that everybody knows how it is, how hard it is. Also, they like the dark side, the light side and the dark side.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. How is the global demand nowadays, the film and television and streaming industry? Because now we are in the streaming industry era. What are the new opportunities out there for this kind of era in the streaming? And what are the new things that are coming up in the coming years? What are your predictions?
Yeah, so prior to COVID, I think the streaming wars were going to last a long time, and who knows what the outcome was going to be. But because of COVID has influenced so many things globally, especially in business. And I think COVID kind of accelerated the fact that everybody needs to get used to the reality that streaming is here to stay. It probably always was, but now I think it's definitive, and there's no problem with that, because for content creators, it's another avenue for your product to be, it's another marketplace. And like I was saying, the marketplace dictates everything. So you have all these new avenues now where you can get your project sold and ultimately viewed, which is hopefully what you're in this for. It's a crossroads of art and commerce. I mean, if you're just in it for artistic stuff, then take your movies to film festivals and do that. But ultimately, I feel like everyone's kind of climbing a ladder. So being artistic and getting stuff in film festivals is kind of the lower rungs of the ladder. And as you get higher, it's more, the commerce side is more and more important, because you get your money to make your next movie. And so you have to be successful at that. I think streaming is here to stay. And I do think that the streaming wars aren't over yet, though. And certainly the bigger studios have all kind of associated with or created their own streaming services. And so those have a lot of power behind them, both financially and by content creation. They have access to, like, Peacock has all this access to content creators, through their NBC network, through Universal Pictures. Same thing with HBO Max and Warner Brothers, and Disney is a juggernaut in and of itself. Although it's really hard, I think, if you're an independent filmmaker, to do anything that will get Disney's attention, right? Because Disney kind of has their business model, and doesn't mean that if you don't make a super successful crowd-funded movie, that the first time a Disney executive sees it and thinks, oh, this person would be great to make Marvel movie number 225, then you're off and running. But like it's pretty unusual for someone to create an original piece of content or IP that Disney's going to be interested in.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's true. The market decides whether it's good a product or whether it's bad the product. That's the reality, and that's true. I think that's one point very important for artists, that they don't teach that in school, because they always focus on the technical side and artistic side, but they don't teach how I can deal with money, how I can deal with budget, how I can deal with the market, how I can know about marketing to market my movie. All those things are very important if you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to create your own business, or to be an independent filmmaker and make your own films. So that's very important to know.
Well, you just said something that I like to try to get out there in every conversation I have. And it's that I always ask emerging filmmakers, when I first meet them and I first hear about their project, what is your marketing and distribution plan? Yes. Or even it's even simpler than that. It's like, who is your audience? Mm-hmm. Like, who is your audience for this movie? Because if you can't answer those three questions, then you're not ready yet. When you're making your movie, you can maybe discover who your audience is when you're making it, but when you set out to do it, you're making a movie for a specific audience. If you're making a short that has one character in it, and it's kind of this story of self-discovery, and you're shooting it yourself with your iPhone or whatever, like, you still need to know who the audience is. Yes. Is it suicide awareness people? Because then it's mental health awareness. Okay, that's your audience. That's who you need to market to. That's who you need to focus on. You find film festivals that focus on that kind of stuff. Get your movie seen there. Like, whatever it is, you need to know from day one, when you're writing that script or when you finish that script, who is your audience? How are you going to market this movie? And who do you want to distribute it? Do you want it to go to film festivals? Do you want it to go to a releasing entity? Do you want it to go to a studio? Because if you're making something high, a piece of high art, and your expectation is that Disney will release it, you're wrong. Like, I'll just tell you right now, the marketplace has already decided for you. You are wrong. So if you're writing a superhero movie or a science fiction movie and it's based off of the Star Wars universe, I mean, you might be violating some sort of copyright laws, but at least you can get over those hurdles and get something to Disney ultimately, and they might like it. But if you produce a piece of high art and your expectation is that one of the majors is going to release it, it's likely a false scenario. Like, you're kidding yourself. But if you make a budget, if in your mind you're writing a script that's this big budget action movie that takes place in Paris, and that you have this female forward character, and you have this other sidekick, and he's kind of a James Bond type, and all that kind of stuff, if you're putting together that screenplay, then you might be able to sell that to a big studio or a big reputable releasing entity. Now, there is a marketplace for everything. It's just how successful will you be in that marketplace. If you make a piece of high art on film or on digital, there will probably be an audience for that. It may not be that wide unless it turns out really, really good. But you can still get that released. You can still get that seen by an audience. And if it's really good, the audiences will tell you that it's good, and you'll likely make your second movie. But the marketplace always decides.
Yeah, that's true. Well, John, what will be your last words in the end of this podcast? Your last words for these people, young people, filmmakers that really want to get into this kind of industry here in Latin America?
Okay, I always have this thing that I say to people who kind of don't know where they want to go or what they want to do. And so I always have this catchphrase that I say, it's called read everything. Or in this modern day, it can be watch everything or listen to everything, because I know there's books on Audible and all those kinds of, there's podcasts like this one where people are literally, there's so much content out there. I think it's, I've heard that if you do something 10,000 times, you're kind of considered an expert at it, right? Like watch whatever movies you can, on the big screen or even the small screen. You can learn anyway. I prefer the large screen. And listen to and read as much as you can. Follow me on Insta, follow me on LinkedIn. I have a book out there. It's, like a couple 100-page book that I wrote about how to make it in the industry. So please find that on eBay or Amazon. And thank you so much for having me.